Dad, open the door. On a freezing Christmas Eve, I stood on my father's porch, shaking so hard I could barely keep my balance. My 1-year-old daughter was soaked through, crying against my shoulder as icy rain dripped from the hood of her tiny pink coat. "He brought his mistress home," I whispered when the door opened. "His mother packed our things, threw us outside, and locked the door." My father looked down at his little granddaughter, her lips trembling from the cold. Then he slowly tightened his grip around the ring of keys in his hand. "They picked the wrong family." The first thing my father did wasn't ask what happened. He took Lily from my arms. She was crying so hard that her tiny body shook with every breath, and her little hands had turned bright red from the cold. Dad wrapped her inside his old flannel jacket before carrying her straight toward the fireplace. "Let's get this little girl warm," he said quietly. Nothing else. No questions. No anger. No panic. Just those 6 words. I stood frozen in the entryway, still gripping the handle of the suitcase Ryan's mother had thrown onto the lawn barely 30 minutes earlier. The zipper had burst open somewhere along the drive, and one of Lily's stuffed rabbits was hanging halfway out. Dad bent beside the fireplace and laid Lily on the thick quilt my mother had sewn years before she passed away. "I'll be right back, sweetheart," he whispered to her. Then he disappeared into the kitchen. I finally stepped inside. The familiar smell of cinnamon, pine, and burning oak wrapped around me. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, decorated exactly the way Mom used to decorate it. White lights, handmade ornaments, and the tiny angel Lily had tried to pull off the branches the week before. None of it had changed. Everything else had. Dad returned carrying a bottle of warm milk. He tested it against his wrist before gently feeding Lily. Only after she stopped crying did he walk back toward me. "You're soaked," he said. "I didn't notice." "I know." He opened the hallway closet and pulled out an old sweater. "It belonged to my mother." "I washed it last week," he said. "Thought you might need it someday." I stared at the sweater. I hadn't worn it since Mom's funeral. My throat tightened. Dad didn't push it into my hands. He simply laid it over the back of a chair and walked away, giving me space to decide for myself. That was always how he loved people. Quietly. Respectfully. Without forcing anything. 20 minutes later, Lily was asleep beside the fire, wrapped in blankets. Dad placed a mug of hot chamomile tea in front of me. Only then did he sit down across the kitchen table. "You ready?" I nodded. My voice cracked almost immediately. Ryan changed. Dad didn't interrupt. At first it was little things. Working late. Missing dinner. Forgetting weekends he'd promised to spend with us. I laughed bitterly. I actually believed every excuse. "How long?" "Maybe 6 months. Dad nodded once. "Go on." "Then his mom fell and broke her hip. She moved in." "For a few weeks," I answered. "At least, that's what Ryan said." The few weeks became months. His mother criticized everything I did. The way I cooked. The way I dressed Lily. The way I folded towels. Even the way I laughed. Ryan never defended me. Not once. At first he stayed quiet, I said. Then he started agreeing with her. Dad lowered his eyes into his coffee. Still silent. There were days when I'd spend 12 hours taking care of Lily and his mother, and Ryan would come home asking why dinner wasn't ready. I rubbed my forehead. I kept telling myself he was stressed. "Were you working?" I shook my head. "No. You left your marketing job after Lily was born. I wanted more time with her." "Do you regret it?" I looked toward the fireplace. Lily had one tiny fist wrapped around the stuffed rabbit that had fallen from the suitcase. "No," I whispered. "I regret trusting the wrong person." The words hung between us. Dad didn't rush to fill the silence. Outside, sleet tapped softly against the windows. Christmas Eve. Families across town were opening presents, singing carols, laughing around dinner tables. Mine had ended on a front lawn with 2 garbage bags full of clothes. "It happened tonight?" Dad finally asked. I nodded. "I heard a car pull into the driveway. I thought Ryan had forgotten something. Instead, a woman stepped out. She couldn't have been older than 30. Long blonde hair, red coat, high heels that sank into the snow. She carried a wrapped Christmas gift. She smiled at me, I whispered. She actually smiled. Dad's jaw tightened. Ryan introduced her. My hands began shaking again. He said she was staying for Christmas. I closed my eyes. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. His mother walked into the living room, looked right at me, then said, "If you're finally done pretending this marriage works, pack your things." I swallowed hard. I laughed. I honestly thought it was some horrible misunderstanding. It wasn't. Ryan looked me in the eye, then said the words I'll probably hear for the rest of my life. I've already made my choice. I couldn't breathe remembering them. He told me he wanted a divorce. In front of her? Yes. In front of Lily? Yes. I stared into my untouched tea. I asked where we were supposed to go. His mother answered before he could. Anywhere but here. I felt tears running down my face again. She packed our clothes herself. She put Lily's diapers into trash bags. She carried them outside. She locked the front door while I was still standing on the porch. The room fell completely silent. Dad didn't curse. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He simply looked towards his sleeping granddaughter, then back at me. "Emily." "Yes?" One question. His voice remained calm. So calm it almost scared me. "Do you want to save this marriage?" I didn't answer right away. 6 years. A wedding. A baby. Countless promises. Every memory rushed through my head. Then I remembered Lily crying in the freezing rain while Ryan stood inside another warm house. No? The word surprised even me. "I don't." Dad nodded. "What do you want?" I looked toward my daughter. She had finally stopped trembling. "I want Lily to grow up somewhere no one can ever throw her out the front door." For the first time that night, Dad smiled. Not because he was happy, because he understood. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over mine. "Then that's what we're going to protect." He stood and carried our empty mugs to the sink. As he turned off the kitchen light, he spoke without looking back. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we'll start building your way home." I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the familiar ceiling in my old bedroom and remembered everything. Christmas morning. Not in my own home. Not beside my husband. Not under the tree where Lily should have opened her first real Christmas presents. Instead, I was back in the house where I had grown up, wearing one of my mother's old sweaters while my marriage quietly came apart. I walked downstairs. Dad was already in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Lily sat in her high chair, happily pounding a plastic spoon against the tray as if nothing had happened the night before. Children were remarkable that way. They could survive a nightmare if someone simply made them feel safe afterward. Dad glanced over his shoulder. "Morning." "Morning." He slid a plate onto the table. "Eat first." "Dad." "Eat?" There wasn't an ounce of harshness in his voice. Just experience. He knew there would be plenty of time for difficult conversations. There was no reason to have them on an empty stomach. For several minutes, the only sounds in the room were Lily's giggles, forks against plates, and Christmas music playing softly from the old radio on the counter. When breakfast was over, Dad poured us both fresh coffee. Then he reached into a file cabinet beside his desk. "I've been expecting this day," he said quietly. My heart dropped. "You knew?" I hoped I was wrong. He placed a thin folder on the table. "I never thought Ryan would become this man." I stared at it. "What is it?" "Paperwork." He opened the folder carefully. 6 years earlier. The date stared back at me. The day Ryan and I bought our house. I remembered every detail. We had been married less than a year. Housing prices had climbed faster than we expected. We had enough income to qualify for a mortgage, but not enough savings for the down payment. Ryan had been embarrassed. He wanted to do everything on his own. Dad offered to help. Ryan resisted for almost a week before finally accepting. I thought you just loaned us the down payment. I did. I paid you back. You paid back part of it. I frowned. What do you mean? Dad slid another document toward me. This is the agreement your husband signed. I looked at the signature. Ryan's. Mine. Dad's. I don't remember this. You trusted Ryan. I did. And Ryan trusted that nobody reads paperwork. Despite everything, I almost smiled. That sounded exactly like him. He always skimmed contracts, insurance forms, loan documents, anything longer than 2 pages. What does it say? Dad leaned back. It says the down payment wasn't a gift. I know. It also says I remained a secured investor until the property was refinanced or sold. I blinked. Investor? That's the legal language my office recommended. You wrote this? No. My firm did. He paused. I insisted on one additional clause. I felt my stomach tighten. What clause? If the marriage ended because one spouse intentionally abandoned the marital relationship or committed serious misconduct that directly caused the breakdown of the marriage. He tapped the page. My investment would be repaid before any remaining equity was divided. I stared at him. For several long seconds, I couldn't speak. You plan for us to fail? Dad shook his head immediately. No, I planned for someone to change. He folded his hands together. Emily, I practiced real estate law for 35 years. I've watched people promise forever on Saturday and hire lawyers on Monday. I never doubted you. I simply understood that I couldn't predict another person's character. I looked back down at the agreement. Everything had been signed, properly notarized, recorded, perfectly legal. Ryan had signed every page. He never read any of this. Dad smiled sadly. No. He asked if the documents were standard. I told him they protected everyone's interests. They did. I looked out the kitchen window. Snow had finally begun falling. Gentle. Quiet. Beautiful. Nothing like the storm inside me. I feel stupid. Dad answered immediately. No. You trusted your husband. That's not stupidity. That's marriage. His words settled something inside me. Not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe again. My phone buzzed. Ryan. One new email. Subject, divorce filing. No apology. No explanation. Only a copy of the petition his attorney had filed that morning. He had wasted no time. I closed the message without replying. Dad noticed. Good. I wasn't going to answer. I know. He stood and carried his coffee cup to the sink. The loudest person in a lawsuit usually believes they're winning. What if he is? Dad turned around. Then we'll deal with reality. But if he only thinks he is... He let the sentence hang. There's no reason to interrupt him. Across town, Ryan was celebrating. I didn't know it yet, but later I would learn exactly how that Christmas afternoon unfolded. His mother had cooked a large holiday dinner. The dining room table was filled with roast turkey, mashed potatoes, sweet potato casserole, and pies. The woman he had chosen over me sat in my chair. She wore the gold necklace Ryan had given me on our 3rd anniversary. His mother insisted she try it on. It suits you better, she'd said with a smile. Someone took pictures. Ryan smiled for every one of them. Later that afternoon, his mother posted several of those photos online. Finally, our family feels complete. The comments poured in. Congratulations. Heart emojis. Friends who had no idea his wife and baby had spent the previous night shivering on someone else's porch. When one distant cousin asked where Emily and Lily were, his mother replied, "Sometimes people leave when they aren't appreciated." The lie spread faster than the truth ever could. Meanwhile, I was sitting beside my father, watching Lily stack wooden blocks on the living room rug. I want to respond, I admitted. I know. I want everyone to know what really happened. Dad nodded. But not today. When? When the truth can protect you. He looked toward Lily. not just satisfy your anger. I followed his gaze. My daughter laughed as the tower of blocks collapsed. She clapped for herself, completely unaware that her life had changed forever. Dad spoke softly. I have one job now. I looked at him. What's that? Making sure she never spends another Christmas wondering whether she has a home. Tears filled my eyes again, for the first time since the night before. They weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. Because I finally understood something. Ryan thought he had thrown me out. He hadn't. He had sent me back to the one place where I would never have to earn the right to belong. And he still had no idea what he had signed 6 years earlier, or how expensive that mistake was about to become. The first week after Christmas taught me something I had never understood before. Silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes silence was discipline. Every instinct I had told me to fight back. I wanted to answer every accusation, correct every lie, and tell every mutual friend exactly what Ryan had done. More than once, I picked up my phone and started typing a response before setting it back down again. Each time, Dad said the same thing. Don't argue with someone who's collecting evidence against himself. At first, I hated hearing it. By the third day, I finally understood what he meant. Ryan couldn't stop talking. He sent texts demanding that I make the divorce easy. He emailed me lists of furniture he considered his. He reminded me that he was paying the mortgage and suggested I should be reasonable about giving up any claim to the house. I answered none of them. Instead, I forwarded every message to my attorney. Dad never even asked to read them. Your lawyer needs them, he said. I don't. One afternoon, while Lily napped upstairs, I finally asked the question that had been bothering me since Christmas. Were you ever this calm when your clients were going through divorce? Dad looked up from the crossword puzzle he had been pretending to work on. He smiled. No, you weren't? I was usually calmer. I laughed despite myself. How? Because panic makes people expensive. I shook my head. That sounds exactly like something a lawyer would say. It is. He folded the newspaper and leaned back in his chair. Most divorces aren't won because one person is smarter. They're won because one person stays steady while the other loses control. His words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. So I began rebuilding the parts of my life I still could control. I reopened my LinkedIn profile, updated my resume, reached out to an old marketing director I had worked with before Lily was born. To my surprise, she remembered me immediately. We've been looking for someone part-time, she said over the phone. It isn't glamorous, but it's flexible. I'd love that. By the end of the week, I had my first interview scheduled. It wasn't a career. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Dad watched me print my resume. I've missed seeing you smile because of work. I forgot I was good at it. You didn't forget. You were busy loving your family. That sentence lingered with me all day. Ryan, meanwhile, seemed determined to convince the world that he was the victim. One of our mutual friends quietly called me. I don't know what's going on, she said carefully, but Ryan told everyone you left because your depression got worse. I closed my eyes. I've never been diagnosed with depression. I know. He also said you refused counseling. I let out a slow breath. I never refused. He never asked. When I hung up, anger washed over me again. Dad noticed. What happened? He told people I'm mentally unstable. Dad nodded once. And it's a lie. I know. Aren't we going to do something? We already are. I frowned. We are? He pointed toward my phone. You have the truth. You have medical records. You have witnesses. And now, he paused. You also have proof that he's willing to lie. That evening, another email arrived. This one came from Ryan's attorney. The language was polite, professional, cold. It requested that I voluntarily surrender any interest in the marital residence in exchange for an efficient resolution. Attached was a proposed settlement. It was almost insulting. Ryan would keep the house, most of the savings, his retirement accounts, nearly everything. In return, I would receive a small cash payment and temporary child support. I read it twice before handing it to Dad. He didn't even finish the second page. They're negotiating from confidence. What does that mean? It means they don't know enough yet. The next morning, my attorney called. I assume you've seen their proposal. I have. What would you like to do? Before I could answer, Dad quietly held out his hand. I put the phone on speaker. He waited until my attorney greeted him. This is Richard Carter. Good morning, Mr. Carter. I've reviewed the proposal. So have I. There was a brief silence. Then Dad said, almost casually, I think it's time we meet in person. The attorney hesitated. I believe that would be appropriate. Excellent. My office. Friday morning. After the call ended, I stared at Dad. That's it? That's enough. You don't seem worried. I'm not. Why? He smiled gently. Because their proposal tells me exactly what they don't know. Friday arrived with gray skies and freezing rain. Dad insisted I stay home with Lily. I'll handle the meeting. I should be there. You will. When it's useful. I hated waiting. Every hour felt like 3. I cleaned the kitchen twice. Folded laundry that didn't need folding. Checked my phone every few minutes. Finally, shortly after noon, Dad came home. He removed his coat. Hung it carefully. Washed his hands. Only then did he walk into the living room. Well, he sat down across from me. They were surprised. About what? They assumed I co-signed a mortgage. You didn't? I did. But that's only part of the story. He stopped there. I leaned forward. Dad, what happened? He looked toward Lily, who was happily stacking blocks on the rug again. Then he looked back at me. The lawyer asked for copies of every document. And I told him I'd be happy to provide certified copies. My heart beat faster. What did he say? He stopped negotiating. I frowned. What does that mean? It means... Dad picked up his coffee. He finally started reading. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I saw something different in my father's expression. Not satisfaction. Not pride. Certainty. Ryan had spent 6 years believing the paperwork he signed didn't matter. Now someone had finally taken the time to read every page. And whatever they had found, it was enough to silence an attorney. Friday afternoon, Dad finally told me what had happened in the conference room. He didn't dramatize it. He never did. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee, waited until Lily had fallen asleep upstairs, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The meeting lasted less than 40 minutes, he said. Only 40? It would have been 20 if they had read the documents 6 years ago. I couldn't help smiling. What happened? He slid his leather briefcase onto the table and removed a neatly organized folder. I met Ryan's attorney. The first 10 minutes were exactly what you'd expect. He insisted Ryan wanted an amicable divorce. He said his client hoped to avoid unnecessary legal expenses. He said everyone should move on with dignity. Dad looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. I agreed with every word. That surprised me. You did? Of course. I also prefer an honest settlement. He opened the folder. But honesty requires everyone to know the same facts. He handed me a copy of the agreement I had already seen. This is the document they finally started reading. I traced Ryan's signature with my finger. So, what happened when they reached the clause? Dad leaned back. The attorney stopped talking. According to Dad, Ryan had arrived nearly 20 minutes late. He walked into the conference room wearing an expensive charcoal suit. Confident. Relaxed. Certain. He nodded politely at Dad but never apologized for Christmas Eve. Not once. Instead, he sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and smiled. I think we can wrap this up today. Dad simply replied, I hope so. Ryan's attorney began reviewing the proposed settlement. Dad listened quietly. When the attorney finished, Dad slid another folder across the table. I'd appreciate it if you reviewed the original property agreement before we continue. The attorney adjusted his glasses. He skimmed the first page. Then the second. By page 4, his expression changed. Ryan noticed. What? His attorney didn't answer. He kept reading. The room grew strangely quiet. Finally, Ryan frowned. What is it? His attorney looked up. When was the last time you read these documents? Ryan shrugged. I signed them years ago. Did you actually read them? I didn't think I needed to. The attorney slowly removed his glasses. I wish you had. I looked back at Dad. What exactly did he discover? Dad tapped the agreement. The down payment wasn't treated as a gift. I know. But there's more. He turned to another page. When I contributed the down payment, it was documented as a secured financial investment. If the mortgage was refinanced, the investment had to be repaid. If the property was sold, the investment had to be repaid. And if the marriage ended because of Ryan's misconduct? He paused. The investment would be satisfied before any remaining equity was divided. I stared at him. So the equity isn't what Ryan thinks it is. He can't simply keep the house. No, he can't refinance it without satisfying the agreement. No, he can't sell it and pocket the proceeds. No, everything had been written clearly. Nothing hidden. Nothing deceptive. Ryan had simply assumed paperwork didn't matter. What did Ryan say? Dad smiled faintly. The first thing? I nodded. He accused me of tricking him. I almost laughed. And I reminded him the agreement had been drafted by his own closing attorney. He chose to sign. No one rushed him. No one prevented him from asking questions. Dad folded his hands. The law doesn't protect people from refusing to read. Ryan's attorney had requested a short break. The two of them stepped into the hallway. Dad remained in the conference room, alone. When they returned 10 minutes later, the confidence Ryan had carried into the meeting was gone. His attorney spoke instead. We'd like certified copies of every recorded document. Dad nodded. You'll have them this afternoon. Then Ryan finally addressed him. Why? Dad looked at him calmly. Why what? Why would you do this? I helped you buy that house. Ryan shook his head. No, I mean this agreement. Dad answered without raising his voice. I've spent 35 years watching good people trust the wrong person. I promised myself my daughter would never lose everything because someone else broke their vows. Ryan had no reply. As Dad finished telling me the story, my phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. We need to talk. Another arrived before I could react. Why didn't you tell me about your father? I stared at the screen. Dad noticed. What is it? He wants to talk. What do you want to do? I thought about Christmas Eve. About Lily crying in the freezing rain. About the front door closing in our faces. Then I locked my phone and set it face down. Nothing. Dad nodded with quiet approval. Good. Ryan, however, wasn't finished making mistakes. By the following Monday, he had called 3 times. Left 2 voicemails. Sent 4 texts. Each one sounded less confident than the last. He no longer demanded. He negotiated. He suggested working things out. He insisted lawyers were making everything worse. I answered none of them. Instead, every message was forwarded to my attorney. Just as Dad had taught me. Every choice leaves a trail, he reminded me. Let him decide what kind of trail he wants to leave. Ryan wasn't the only one beginning to panic. The woman he had brought home on Christmas Eve was asking questions too. Questions he couldn't answer. She had believed he owned the house outright. She had believed the divorce would be quick. She had believed he would soon be free, wealthy, and starting a glamorous new life. Instead, she learned the house couldn't simply become theirs. Legal obligations came first. Financial uncertainty came next. For the first time since Christmas, the fantasy they had built together showed its first crack. And once the first crack appeared, more were certain to follow. By the second week of January, the silence around Ryan had begun to disappear. Not because people had stopped talking, because they had started asking questions. At first, he believed he could control the narrative the same way he had controlled conversations at home. He told coworkers that the divorce had become complicated. He implied I was refusing to cooperate. He hinted that my father was trying to take advantage of him. The problem with lies is that they multiply. Each new version required another explanation, another omission, another person to convince. Meanwhile, I had stopped trying to convince anyone. Dad had been right. The truth needed no advertising. Only time. A few days later, my attorney called. "We've received another settlement proposal." "Better?" "A little." "Enough?" She laughed softly. "Not even close." Ryan was now offering to split the equity after repaying Dad's investment. Only weeks earlier, he had insisted the house belonged entirely to him. Reality was beginning to catch up. Dad looked up from the newspaper when I ended the call. "They've started bargaining." "You knew they would." "I knew they'd have to." He folded the paper carefully. Pride is expensive. Life slowly settled into a new routine. Every weekday morning, I dropped Lily at a small daycare recommended by one of Dad's neighbors before heading to my part-time marketing job. It wasn't glamorous. I answered emails, updated social media campaigns, and helped organize client events. But every paycheck carried something my old life had slowly taken away. Confidence. The first time I bought Lily's groceries with money I had earned again, I sat in my car afterward and cried. Not because I was sad, because I remembered who I had been before I started believing my entire identity depended on being someone's wife. That evening, Dad found me balancing my budget at the kitchen table. "You look happier." "I think I am." "You know why?" I smiled. "Because I'm working again?" "No." He pointed to the notebook in front of me. "Because you're making decisions instead of waiting for someone else to make them." Ryan, on the other hand, was discovering what happened when control slipped away. The first crack came from somewhere neither of us expected. His own company. One Friday afternoon, one of my former coworkers forwarded me a message. "Did you hear what's happening at Ryan's office?" I hadn't. Apparently, Human Resources had opened an internal review. Not because Ryan was having an affair. His company wasn't interested in his private life. They were interested in what he had done during company time. Several emails had surfaced, showing that Ryan had used his corporate email account to coordinate personal trips with the woman he was seeing. Worse still, some of those same email chains included comments about me. Comments describing me as unstable. Comments suggesting I had abandoned our home voluntarily. Comments sent to coworkers who had absolutely no reason to know anything about my marriage. The issue was no longer personal. It had become professional. Dad listened quietly as I told him. "I didn't report him." "I know. I haven't talked to anyone at his company." "I know." "So how?" He shrugged. "People create their own evidence every day. They simply forget someone might read it later." Ryan called again that night. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. And another. Finally, he left a message. "Emily, this has gone too far." I stared at my phone. "Too far." The words echoed in my head. Not the night he watched his mother throw our daughter's belongings into trash bags. Not the night he locked us outside. Not the Christmas dinner he shared with another woman while Lily slept in her grandfather's guest room. No. Apparently, things had gone too far only after consequences arrived. I deleted the voicemail, then emailed a copy to my attorney. A week later, something happened that surprised all of us. Ryan's mother came to Dad's house. She didn't call first. She simply knocked. Dad opened the door. She stood there holding a casserole dish covered with aluminum foil. It looked almost absurd, as though baked pasta could erase Christmas Eve. "I'd like to speak with Emily." Dad remained polite. "About what?" "We're family." He looked at her for several seconds before answering. "No. We used to be." She lowered her eyes. "I made mistakes." Dad nodded. "You did." "I only wanted what was best for my son. And when you pushed your granddaughter into the freezing rain," his voice remained calm. "How exactly was that best for him?" She had no answer. She quietly set the casserole on the porch. "I hope someday she'll forgive me." Dad gently picked up the dish and handed it back. "Take this home. We already have dinner." Then he closed the door. Not angrily. Simply completely. When he returned to the living room, I realized something. He hadn't closed the door out of revenge. He had closed it because some doors should remain closed. The biggest turning point came 2 weeks later. My attorney invited me to review additional discovery materials. Among the documents was security footage from our neighborhood. Ryan's attorney had requested it after learning nearby homes had exterior cameras. I watched the video in silence. There I was, standing on the porch, holding Lily. Ryan's mother dragging 2 garbage bags toward the curb. Ryan standing inside the open doorway, watching, doing nothing. The recording had no audio. It didn't need any. The images said everything. I couldn't finish watching. I covered my mouth. I thought remembering it was the hardest part. My attorney quietly paused the video. "Sometimes seeing it is worse." Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "Look at Lily." I did. She reached both arms toward me in the video. Even through a grainy security camera, even without sound, you could see exactly who she trusted. Several days later, Ryan requested additional parenting time. His attorney argued he loved his daughter. No one questioned that. But love and judgment are not the same thing. The security footage became part of the record. Not because he had committed a crime, because it showed a choice. A father watching his 1-year-old daughter remain outside in freezing weather, and choosing not to intervene. That choice could not be explained away. It could only be witnessed. As we left the courthouse after that hearing, Dad walked beside me without saying a word. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you think he understands what he's losing?" Dad looked toward the gray winter sky. "I think he understands what he's lost. Those aren't always the same thing." For the first time since Christmas Eve, I believed he was right. Ryan wasn't being punished by my father, or by me. He was living inside the consequences of every decision he had made. And there were still more consequences waiting ahead. By early spring, the bitterness had settled into something quieter. Not peace. Not yet. Something closer to acceptance. The anger that had kept me awake during those first weeks after Christmas no longer lived in every thought. It still appeared from time to time, usually when I folded one of Lily's tiny sweaters or drove past our old neighborhood, but it no longer controlled my days. My life had begun moving forward. Ryan's hadn't. The final hearing was scheduled for a rainy Thursday morning in April. Dad drove us to the courthouse. Neither of us talked much during the ride. Lily sat in the back seat, humming to herself while holding the stuffed rabbit that had nearly fallen out of the broken suitcase on Christmas Eve. The same rabbit. Dad had stitched one of its ears back together a few weeks earlier. He hadn't thrown it away because it was damaged. He had repaired it. Somehow that felt symbolic. Inside the courthouse, everything was quieter than television dramas would have people believe. No shouting. No dramatic confrontations. Just lawyers carrying folders, clerks calling names, and families sitting together in nervous silence. Ryan stood near the courtroom doors. He looked older. Not by years, by consequences. The expensive confidence that had always followed him into every room was gone. His tailored suits had been replaced by a plain navy jacket. His shoulders seemed heavier. His eyes found Lily first. She smiled politely. Then she reached for my hand. I felt her tiny fingers wrap around mine. Ryan noticed. He looked away. When our case was called, we entered together. The judge greeted both attorneys before reviewing the file. She had obviously read everything. The mortgage documents, the financial records, the security footage, the email correspondence, the parenting evaluations, the testimony. Nothing needed to be exaggerated. The evidence spoke clearly enough. Ryan's attorney argued that his client regretted the way the marriage had ended. The judge listened respectfully. Then she asked one question. Does your client dispute that his 1-year-old daughter spent part of Christmas Eve outside the marital home after being removed from the residence? The courtroom became very quiet. Ryan slowly stood. "No, Your Honor." "Do you dispute that you were present?" "No." "Do you dispute that you chose not to intervene?" His voice almost disappeared. "No." The judge lowered her glasses. "I appreciate your honesty." She paused before continuing. "The court wishes to make one point absolutely clear." She looked first at Ryan, then at me. "Infidelity by itself does not determine custody in this state." Ryan seemed relieved for a brief moment. Then the judge continued. "However, a parent's willingness, or unwillingness, to protect the physical and emotional well-being of a young child is directly relevant to the child's best interests." She referred to the security footage. "Whether that child remembers the evening is irrelevant. The adults will. And the choices made that night cannot be ignored." I glanced toward Dad. He never smiled. He never celebrated. He simply listened. The ruling took nearly 20 minutes. The marriage was dissolved. The financial agreement executed exactly as the original documents required.